My name is George MICHR. I'm the Associate Dean for Clinical and Translational Research here at the Med School and the Director of the Michigan Institute for Clinical and Health Research. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you all today to have an engaged discussion related to the translational research ecosystem here at the University of Michigan. And I'm excited to welcome everyone from Courtney, who's a brand new faculty at the University of Michigan, to some of our deans, and Dr. Domino, who's a professor emeritus, still actively doing research in his 90s. So it's a wonderful mix of individuals, and I'm looking forward to having a very engaged discussion. One of the most remarkable things about the University of Michigan is the abundance of resources dedicated to research. One of the most confusing and frustrating things about the University of Michigan is the abundance of resources dedicated to research. So it is complicated. And I was just chatting with Courtney about this. Somebody who's coming here that's new, it's a very confusing landscape. And even for more seasoned faculty, who are embedded in departments, it's really hard to get a sense of the big picture. So that's what I hope to convey today, is really a high-level view of the big picture of resources to help drive translational research. And I'm going to be focusing on resources that apply broadly. We have lots of incredible centers and institutes with a disciplinary focus or a disease focus. This talk is going to be more disease agnostic. So I'm going to start by defining the term translation, discussing the translational cycle. I'm then going to describe some of the resources that support phases of this cycle. I'm going to talk in more detail about MICHR, which supports the full translational spectrum, talk about some networks regionally and nationally that you can access through MICHR, and then we'll get to the most important point of the discussion, and that is really engaging with you, hearing your questions, and hearing your concerns as well. So there's always been a lot of confusion about this term translation and translational research. Etymologically, the term translation derives from a sense of carrying over. Another etymologic origin describes a transfer of meaning. And I rather like that. We're trying to transfer meaning from one domain of research, one domain of science, to another with the ultimate goal of trying to improve health. Now, Dr. Christopher Austin, who's the director in the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, or NCATS, which is the home to the CTSA program that I'll talk about, published an article rather recently entitled Translating Translation. He's acknowledging some of the confusion around this terminology. He calls translation the process of turning observations from the laboratory, clinic, or community into interventions that improve the health of individuals and the public. And that's what we're all about at the University of Michigan Medical School. Translational research is the endeavor to traverse a particular step of the translation process. And then a term or a description that might be less familiar to you is what Dr. Austin calls translational science, which is the field that systematically investigates the translational process in order to ultimately optimize it. So, you in the audience are doing translational research. We at MICHR are trying to do translational science to really understand the process and optimize it. And together, we hope to accomplish, in an efficient manner, translation to the benefit of our patients, their families, and their communities. So the translational cycle has been described in a number of different ways, and there are different things to denote the various phases. I like this one, and it starts with the foundational translational phase, T0, which is basic and preclinical research. Now, there's a lot of baggage around the term translation with respect to basic science, and there are some people, even to this day, who still view this as almost antagonistic, or promoting or advocating for translational science is antagonistic to discovery or preclinical science. And this also is rooted in the competition for NIH funds. I just want to say that I vehemently reject that artificial duality and dichotomy because this is the text to be translated. If we think about a linguistic analogy, bad novels don't get translated to 30 languages. It's got to be a novel that's rich with meaning, and meaning that can be carried over to new domains, new languages in the case of a novel, a new translational phase in the case of research. So from my perspective and the perspective of MICHR, if we want to have a great translational culture and ecosystem, we need great basic science, because the better that text is, the more languages to which it could be translated. So the first step is to T1. And if you think about drug discovery, for example, somebody might have identified a target, developed some kind of therapeutic modality. They test it for safety or efficacy in a preclinical model, and then it moves to a healthy volunteer study. T2 is taking that to patients with a specific disease condition. T1 and T2 represent the clinical trial space. But a good clinical trial, even a big clinical trial, might be necessary, but it is definitely not sufficient for full translation. I learned this the hard way. In my junior faculty years, I conducted some large studies related to brain monitoring in the perioperative period. One of the articles got published in the New England Journal. I was senior author. My co-PI was first author. It had an editorial. I was overjoyed. I was convinced that I had changed the world. And a few years later, I found out I hadn't even changed the mind of the guy in the office next to me in my department who participated in the study. So it is not enough to have a good impact factor in order to achieve real impact. There has got to be some level of implementation, and we're going to be talking about that. So T3 is really getting the data of a clinical trial into practice. And then finally, T4 relates to healthcare delivery and policy. You'll notice this is not just a line. It doesn't just start in the lab and move to policy. It's a cycle. The cycle is iterative. It continues. It's dynamic. You can start in different places. For example, the community, because throughout this cycle, we need to be focused on healthcare improvements and community engagement. Okay, so this is the translational cycle in generic terms. How is support for this cycle instantiated across the various units of the University of Michigan? And this is just a sketch to help you organize your thoughts about the various units that are at the University of Michigan. Let me note from the outset, this is far from comprehensive. I'm selecting out some key resources or representatives for each translational phase. So T0, that discovery science, preclinical science, happens in our basic science departments of the med school. It also happens in basic science divisions within clinical departments. We have the Life Sciences Institute. I'm going to be talking about that in a little more detail with respect to drug discovery. And we have lots of partners in the schools and colleges on campus. For example, engineering, where we might not be getting a drug that's developed, but a device that's going to be tested. And of course, there are many other units across campus that contribute to this foundational discovery. When we move to T1 and T2, as I mentioned before, this is really the clinical trial space. And we have a fairly new clinical trial network here at the University of Michigan Medical School that I'll discuss. And then T3 and T4, where we have resources for implementation and for policy. I'm going to be talking about the Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation, or IHPI, although I'm not going to discuss the Institute for Social Research. It is truly an internationally recognized gem at the University of Michigan, and also a very unique first-in-class department at the med school, that of Learning Health Sciences. And again, throughout this process, we have to be thinking about community and industry partners, because for many translational accomplishments, there needs to be a step of commercialization, such as a drug or device, to actually get to the market to have the intended effect and impact. I'm, again, going to be talking about a high-level overview. We have some very junior investigators here. We have some senior investigators. And we even have our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Kunkel, in the background. So some of you are really going to know a lot of this. But for many of these units, I'm going to be talking about some of the newer initiatives that you might not be familiar with. So I'm hoping everybody will derive something from the talk. So we have been trying to think broadly about the concept of translation and have even reached beyond the health sciences and the narrow biomedical conception to engage the arts. Some of you might have been at the symposium that we hosted several years ago where we had musical performance. And we have recently engaged with the Stamps School of Art and Design. And about a year from now, when you go to the Stamps Art Gallery, you're going to be seeing an installation that is expressing some of the research that's done in chronic pain and addiction in a way that helps translate it for the public. So we're thinking broadly about this concept of translation. So let's talk about some of the resources. And I mentioned that for the T0 phase, I wanted to focus on the Life Sciences Institute. Many of you are probably familiar with LSI. It is populated with some highly accomplished scientists. But in addition to the original research that goes on there, there are also two cores of relevance to the translational process with respect to drug therapy. LSI is the home to the Center for the Discovery of New Medicines, as well as the multi-unit, multidisciplinary Michigan Drug Discovery Initiative that spans the College of Pharmacy, the medical school, MICHR, and other units across campus. It also houses the Center for Chemical Genomics. So those resources, Center for the Discovery of New Medicines, Center for Chemical Genomics, can help support the development of a drug from that target discovery in the lab up until the preclinical development that allows you to enter the T1 space of clinical trials. MICHR has also been actively engaged in this space in the past few years, and we have a number of initiatives. One relates to enhancing access to experimental therapeutics. We're working through the Fda Expanded Access program, and Kevin Weatherwax here in front, our managing director, and myself are co-PIs on an NIH U01 that I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And also, I'm pleased to announce that later in the year, we are going to be launching a Center for Drug Repurposing. Johnny Sexton, who's relatively new faculty, has been doing a fantastic job and leading a lot of our drug repurposing initiatives. So why drug repurposing? Well, many of you probably know that the process of developing a drug has about a 90 to 95% fail rate. And even when it is successful, getting something from the target that's been identified in the laboratory to market can take 10 to 15 years and cost $1 to $2 billion. So if we are looking for efficient translational solutions to the problems that are afflicting our patients, we have to think about more efficient strategies. And one of them relates to drug repurposing, where you have a compound that, for example, might be in clinical use, or it has been tested, it's been safe, but it's failed for a primary indication, but it might have efficacy with some other condition. Now, I want to give you an example from my field. I'm an anesthesiologist and neuroscientist, and we use the drug ketamine in anesthesia. We use it to induce anesthesia. We use it for intraoperative analgesia. Now, on a historical note, ketamine was introduced into clinical practice right here at the University of Michigan. It was synthesized at Parke Davis in Detroit, and the first clinical use of ketamine happened here as a collaboration with pharmacology in the Department of Anesthesiology. And actually, the clinical pharmacologist who introduced this into practice in the mid-1960s is Dr. Ed Domino, who's right here with us. So ketamine, thanks to Dr. Domino and Gunter Korsen, has had a long-standing history of use in anesthesia. However, in the 1990s and in the subsequent decades, it was discovered that ketamine is one of the most efficacious antidepressants available, and it is the most rapid-acting antidepressant. So, ketamine was recently approved for medically refractory depression, and that is a classic example of drug repurposing. Now it could be used in patients with depression with the 50-year history of use in anesthesiology. So those are the kinds of wins that we would hope to accomplish with our Center for Drug Repurposing. I want to give a shout out to one core that's specifically related to drug development, but also is relevant for other lines of investigation, and that's the in vivo animal core, the IVAC. They can be helpful for dosing of drugs, blood collection, clinical chemistry and hematology, histology, and pathologic evaluation. And there are a number of advantages, such as standardizing your protocols. They offer high value, and they can be very efficient. I'm going to be talking about resources to identify other cores across campus that might be of relevance to your research. So now let's move into this T1, T2 space, and I will describe briefly our clinical trials network. So 5 to 10 years ago, the quality of a clinical trial at the University of Michigan really was heterogeneous, and it varied based on the expertise of a particular study team or a particular PI. You would have data capture techniques that ranged from something electronic, like a validated electronic data capture, to somebody writing things on a piece of paper and stuffing them into their white coat. And I'm not kidding. So it has been long recognized that we needed to move beyond that heterogeneity and really set up a process and a system to ensure a higher quality and a more consistent quality of clinical trials. And so in 2015, after an extensive process of reflection and engagement, the Clinical Trial Network was launched. And it's a hub and spoke model where you have a clinical trial support office and then 7 different clinical trial support units. Now you might notice that you're not seeing any departmental names on here, and that's part of what makes this program truly innovative. It's actually a trans-departmental clinical trial infrastructure that's organized around 7 different scientific or disciplinary domains that involve multiple departments. And around this, or really supporting this, are a number of central resources, such as the Investigational Drug Service from pharmacy, MICHR, and a variety of other support systems. I wanted to talk about what's new and what you might be interested in. And one of the newest initiatives is to provide facilities such as space, equipment, investigational drug support at other sites, off-site clinics. More and more patients are going to be seen outside of the so-called mothership, and clinical and translational research needs to move along with those patients. So the Clinical Trial Support Office has been working with affiliated centers to equip them as sub-sites for clinical research. So that's something to keep your eye on as you're moving out to these various centers as well. And MICHR is working with them to help training for faculty and study team members. Okay, let's move into the T3 and T4 space. Again, implementation is critical if you want to really have an impact. I mentioned the Department of Learning Health Sciences that's led by Chuck Friedman and has played an important role across campus. We are now discussing an implementation science network, and this is that learning cycle that forms the basis of the learning health sciences. So Amy Kilborn's here, you could raise your hand, who's been really connecting a lot of us together, such as Learning Health Sciences, IHPI, MICHR, to launch an implementation science network to help provide the infrastructure that's required to really help this cycle move forward. And that cycle is actually related to the translational cycle itself. I mentioned that IHPI is involved in that, and of course IHPI is really a crown jewel in the University of Michigan. for research on policy and practice impact. Has 4 main pillars: promoting value, improving the health of communities, evaluating impact, and also innovation. And the faculty affiliated with IHPI are now approaching around 600, crosses virtually all schools and colleges of the University of Michigan, and works with a number of centers, both within Michigan medicine and beyond. A couple of new initiatives from IHPI. One is the policy sprint, and there's going to be a call for proposals in the fall of 2019. So if there is a hot policy topic in your area of investigation, you could apply for a policy sprint, and you can have the expertise of the IHPI brought to bear on that policy. Another initiative that John Ayanian, the director, wanted me to highlight is the Health Services Research Student Fellowship and Internship Program, with the next call for applications in February of 2020. Now, this whole cycle needs to be connected to the community and also needs to be connected to industry and in a number of ways. And we're fortunate to have a fantastic unit at the medical school called Fast Forward Medical Innovation that helps take your ideas, which can sometimes be trapped in the university and in university culture, and have it move to impact via entrepreneurship and commercialization. And they do that in a variety of ways, such as commercialization education, navigating innovation through funding and mentorship, as well as business development and business engagement. They work with other units that span the campus and the university, such as Office of Tech Transfer and the Business Engagement Center, to help get you, the investigator, across the proverbial valley of death that lurks in between the ideas and the actual impact in the form of new products for patients. And we can recognize Dr. Brad Martin, who is recently appointed as the new managing director of FFMI, and he is a great partner to MICHR and to the community. Okay, so now I'm going to take some time to describe MICHR. We're really here to help enable and enhance clinical and translational research. And we do this in 4 categories of activities. We educate, we fund, we connect, and we support. And this is a picture from our staff picnic last year. We have about 90 to 100 staff that are a part of MICHR and just do an outstanding job in their roles. It was founded in 2006, and in 2007 it first received a large Clinical and Translational Science Award from the NIH. That was renewed in 2012. Then I took over as director and wrote a new application in 2017, which was successfully funded. And we work as part of a consortium of more than 50 such CTSA institutes and CTSA institutions that are trying to help support the process of translation and convert discoveries to better health for individuals in the community. This just gives you a snapshot of our level of activity. So in fiscal year 2018, we provided over 3,000 unique services to over 2,000 unique clients, primarily within the medical school, but as you can see from across the university. We support dozens of community initiatives, and our Health Research website, which helps connect investigators to the community, at that time had about 34,000 participants ready and willing to volunteer for your studies. That number is now over 40,000, and a great resource. UMHR is also attracting attention from CTSA institutes throughout the country, and we've been very busy disseminating that to a number of different sites. Again, we have 4 categories of activity: education, funding, connection, and support. We host a master's program in collaboration with the School of Public Health, a Master's of Science in Clinical Research, also a number of different training programs. We have career development programs such as our NIH KL2 program, and then recurring events such as these town halls symposia, and a number of other workshops that MICHR sponsors. We also help you with funding. And one of the best front doors to MICHR is the Research Development Corps. This is a free service, and the Corps is composed of some senior, multidisciplinary, seasoned researchers, as well as expert staff who help you in the ideation phase of your study or of your grant. And we've reconfigured this depending on who is interested in a consultation. In the past year to year and a half, I've been very focused on trying to promote large-scale grant proposals to really up the game for team science and up the game for NIH funding for our investigators and our institution. And the Research Development Corps has been critical in helping to support that activity. We also have a grant editing service that has received fantastic reviews. It's also a free service. Now, you can't send it to us the night before it's due at the NIH. But if you get it to us in time, it's really a great way to achieve standardization across the grant. I've been benefited personally in writing R01s, but especially if you are engaged with us to develop a large-scale proposal where you've got a lot of different people and different voices writing different sections, it's very helpful to have that editing service to help achieve consistency and standardization across the grant. We also have our own pilot funding programs, and I'm going to talk about some of our newer large-scale programs. We help connect you to communities. We have a robust community engagement program with long-standing and robust partnerships with various communities across the state of Michigan, and a fantastic participant recruitment unit. If you're planning a clinical trial, you can do a consultation and really develop a cutting-edge strategy for how best to engage participants. And again, my own group has used this. We've gotten wonderful marketing materials for our studies. And then a number of support systems, consultations, clinical research management, multi-site clinical research support, biostatistics, regulatory support such as INDs and IDEs. MICHR now handles virtually 100% of all IND and IDE requests from the University of Michigan, and that is purely on an elective basis, and that is because of the high level of service and the connectivity to the FDA. And we have a Michigan clinical research unit. Actually, we have two. One is in the first floor of the CVC, and another smaller unit at Domino Farms where you can actually conduct your observational or interventional clinical research. And finally, informatics, which of course is going to be critical to your research project. We administer REDCap for the institution, Open Clinica, and a number of other services. You can view our website and click on what you're interested in, and this will come up. Or, let's say Courtney is an early career investigator, you can click on this icon and get a bundle of services that are really more tailored for you. So that's another good way of engaging with the website. So what's new? This isn't cutting edge, but it's really just in its second iteration, and that's our Accelerating Synergy Award. And the goal here is to move the needle from individual grants, pilot grants going to, let's say, an individual R01, which is great at one stage, but for people who are now hitting the mid-career or early senior career phase, we're trying to help up the game by motivating larger grants with team science training. And what this does is to help you have the support you need in order to get from your ideas to a successful large-scale grant application, such as a U award or a P award. This originally was just, well, not just, but focused on translational research. I actually did a town hall around a year ago in this very room on large-scale grants, and Terry Grebe and Steve Kunkel afterwards very kindly offered support to add basic science onto this. So now we have that T0 space that's part of this award, and the IHPI has also contributed so we could really support the full translational spectrum. And there are two stages of planning. One is positioning, where you have an idea and maybe you're 2 years out from your application. This helps you obtain or finalize preliminary data. This grant development stage is 1 year out, where it's really focused on helping to support you to get the grant done. Each of these award mechanisms is $100,000, and if you apply and you want to do it in succession, you can get both of them for a total of $200,000 over 2 years. Something that is really cutting edge, in fact, it hasn't even been announced yet, but will next week. Well, I guess I'm announcing it right now. But it will be launched next week, and that is MICHR's collaboration with the M-Cubed program. Who's heard of M-Cubed in the crowd? Great. So that's coming out of UMOR, and that really helps drive essentially self-assembled multidisciplinary teams who aren't going through the traditional peer-reviewed process of a standard NIH grant application, and they've had wonderful success and wonderful return on investment. So we, of course, have followed the more traditional NIH pathway. We want to experiment with other modalities of driving translational research. So it will be launched next week, and we're looking for innovative translational research projects. It requires 3 faculty collaborators from across 2 different units at the university. And 1 faculty must have a primary appointment in the med school, because we really want to keep it connected to the clinical and translational research culture here. And unlike a traditional pilot grant, which is essentially like an R21, an Ames page and 6 pages, this is really just going to be a couple of brief paragraphs describing the project. So keep your eye out for that. It will be launched in the coming weeks. Okay, so some other resources moving beyond MICHR that are going to be critical to support you across the translational cycle. One is IT. The HITS, or Health Information Technology and Services, is an initial point of contact for Michigan medicine researchers. You can get access to high-performance computing and storage solutions, and access to public cloud computing. And what's emerging now is cloud computing for protected health information as well. HITS is also revamping its approach to basic science computers and is becoming more flexible about the computers that are attached to specific basic science equipment. I don't need to get into the backstory. If you're a basic scientist, you already understand it. But things are changing in that domain. And of course, there are a number of other resources for informatics, such as the Data Office for Clinical and Translational Research. We have Aaron Kaliba right here, who directs that, along with Sachin Katerpal. I mentioned HITS. I mentioned Health Research. Immerse is an electronic medical record search engine that has been developed by David Hanauer and sits in MICHR. Has a variety of uses, both in research and actually in clinical care as well. And of course, a lot of research IT associated with precision health and the recent MIPAC study that is being led by Sachin Katerpal in precision health with the support of MICHR. I wanted to give a shout out to the Central Office of Research that serves all 3 campuses of the university. UMOR, as it's referred to, is really important if you're thinking about multi-school, multi-college, or multi-campus initiatives. Because of the line of sight across the various units, they can really help connect you to the right people and have done some thinking about best practices in launching research initiatives. I play a role in directing translational research for UMOR. We have our own translational research website. I'm not sure if you could tell from where you're sitting, but that's me on the right. There's also, thank you. There's also a website within this that has a list of resources for translational research, not just in the biomedical domain, but reaching out to the law school, public policy, architecture, the arts. Again, especially in this role, I'm trying to think about translation writ large and how we can really integrate a number of different perspectives, really even to facilitate biomedical research as well. Now, speaking of a website compendium of various resources, this has been recently advanced, the Michigan Research Cores, And you can find that at cores.research.umich.edu. And it is a growing list of resources for your research needs. And you can see the various schools and units that are represented here. Still in development, but I think it's going to be a very, very helpful resource. And if you're leading a unit, as I know many of you are, you can also post your own cores there to help advertise them. So getting back to the original comment about the complexity and the confusion, we're hoping that resources like this will really help be a front door to you as you're searching out what you need for your research. Okay, I'm going to move into the final part of what I have to say, and that is the various networks that you can access through MICHR. Research, especially clinical research, is moving more and more toward network-based investigation with multi-site trials, for example. Through MICHR, you can engage with the 55 or so CTSA institutes across the country. And we have some organized activities together, such as a trial innovation network. All 55 CTSA institutes have a single site IRB reliance agreement. That doesn't mean that you automatically have IRB approval across all 55, but everybody has expressed willingness and signed off to cede IRB authority to other places. And this is really important with NIH requirements for single site IRB. Now, if this is overwhelming for you and you're a more junior investigator, but you don't have a network and you want to get launched, you might consider a regional network that MICHR is a part of, and that's MARCH, the Midwest Area Consortium for Health. We have similar agreements in place that lower the barrier to you launching a multi-site clinical trial, for example. And we also have pre-award and post-award support systems in place. So this is underutilized, but it's a really good option because we're local, we interact regularly, and it's a great resource if you're trying to launch a network-based study. I also wanted to mention that PCORI and PCORNet 2.0 is now housed in MICHR. Chuck Friedman, as I mentioned, Chair of Learning Health Sciences, was the PI of a PCORI grant, and the new iteration, thanks to his help and his team's help, has now transitioned into MICHR. So through MICHR, you can also access PCORNet if you're thinking about, for example, comparative effectiveness trials, although interventional trials are also conducted. And then just a couple of networks that we're leading. I mentioned the Fda Expanded Access program, and Kevin Weatherwax and myself and others at MICHR received a U01 to help develop a network to really streamline patient access to experimental therapeutics. We're working with the FDA. We have major industry partners who are interested in this, and also some other organizations across the country. MICHR is also home to the Diamond Network, which is also funded by an NIH U01. And this network has created what's called the Diamond Portal, which is a wonderful resource with contributions from many CTSA institutions that houses clinical and translational research training materials. So you could search for it. It's now being accessed internationally. And speaking of international engagement, I should mention, although not housed in MICHR, we have Senior Associate Dean Joe Kolars and Amy from the Joint Institute, and they are really a point of contact to help you connect with like-minded investigators in China. And this is a very robust program with a long track record and also a track record of success. So that's what I have to say. I want to soon open it up for discussion. Before I do, however, I need to express a thank you to the many wonderful MICHR staff that helped put this on. The efficiency of events like this really are credited to them. So let's have a round of applause for their efforts. And then I want to thank you for your kind attention, and I'll be happy to address any questions that you might have. So there is a division. The question is, should there be? And I think part of the goal, I mean, from the NIH down to our local units, is to try to bridge that gap. And interoperability is the name of the game right now. And we are trying to make efforts to bridge those connections in terms of being able to readily access EHR data for research. Now, I mentioned Immerse as one example of a way of harvesting information very rapidly from the electronic health record. Data Direct is another opportunity. So that's a cohort discovery tool that was developed by Aaron and Sachin that is, unlike other cohort discovery tools such as I2B2, is very user-friendly. And there are other initiatives in play with MICHR, but it's definitely a focus of the IT team. I don't know if Aaron has anything additional to add, but yes, this is an area of active and intense inquiry. And I should also point out that kind of the ethical considerations of that are complex and are also being actively explored by a data use committee. Other questions? Yeah, so MICHR is not really the home to the cores. First of all, thank you for the nice comment. And I would say that we're trying to connect the dots, but we have a long way to go. Again, it's a problem, as you know, in neurophysiology of dimensionality reduction and trying to get this level of complexity to something that is very manageable for the individual investigator. In terms of the cores, MICHR is not the home to the cores or the one that administers the cores. I think your question in terms of how do we access this, how do we navigate and find our way around, was one of the problems that this new Michigan Research Corps' website was intended to solve, to have essentially one-stop shopping in a single portal through which an investigator can identify the various resources that are needed. Yes, sir. You speak into the mic so everybody can...
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the great overview of the MICHR is doing. So one thing, when you talk about the translational cycle, so when we go to the later stage, you always need a lot of investment in terms of money talks. So sometimes you have to partner with external resources to do that. So in this case, how MICHR is planning to get the resources to the university, to the investigators, like angel funds or venture capital funds to do this later stage translational work?
So great question. No money, no mission. So especially as you get into the later stage translation. That is really not within our wheelhouse at MICHR. That's where we turn to the folks like FFMI or the Business Engagement Center. And I don't know if Brad, you wish to comment, but I would say for the med school and beyond really, FFMI is really the home to that business engagement. So great points, and first of all, I want to affirm your suggestion that translation really is about transformation, and I think that is absolutely true. So before I answer, I want to hear what you mean precisely by advocacy, because that could mean a lot of different things. It could be, you could advocate at the departmental level, at the institutional, at government. It's a good question. I'm not sure how that sort of gets instantiated per se. I mean, I think one thing I will comment, and I'll admit from the outset, it's maybe a bit tangential, but I think it's related. One part of that is aligning incentives. So, for example, if I get up here and really am trumpeting the value and virtue of translation, but the promotion and tenure committee for a school or college is punishing anybody who is not doing a traditional, R01 funded research pathway, well, that's problematic. And so I will say, in terms of how do we kind of bake in the advocacy into the infrastructure, there are efforts, and MICHR has been involved in those efforts as well, as has been FFMI, to make sure that those natural activities, and as you said, like doing what's right to try to get to impact, isn't going to be punished by a promotion and tenure committee that says, commercialization, that's not what we do in the academy, or engagement with the community. So that is starting to filter into the policies. However, a couple of years ago, I conducted in my UMOR capacity kind of a landscape assessment of translational research. And although there are a number of policies, I was shocked by the number of emails that I got that despite the policies, you still had senior faculty telling junior faculty, don't talk to the community yet. Why don't you wait until you get tenure, and then you can think about helping others. I mean, in so many words, essentially. So I think that things have started to move in the right direction in terms of, at least with that dimension, aligning incentives and not actively punishing people for doing it. I think there's probably a lot more work to be done to have that really filter down on multiple cultural levels, because oftentimes the junior investigator isn't going to read the policy book. They're talking to more senior faculty. So that's just one example that I bring up. But I think it's a great question. I mean, I think in order to achieve this, there really has to be buy-in, maybe not for an individual project per se, but for this kind of activity. I'm not sure if your mic's on. I can hear you, but I don't know.
A related question as to whether there's any system for assigning senior mentors in translational research, given the complexity and the last questioner's comments, to help people through that process.
Yes, so that's something, I mean, we're very focused on mentorship. I could speak for MICHR at least, but I know this is true of a number of units, where we do try to connect people. Our research development core does try to serve a mentorship role in terms of helping to establish the right plan and connect the investigator to the right people, especially a junior investigator. And also we engage in mentorship training through MICHR. So that's just one effort. I mean, mentorship is a big problem in general, just because of bandwidth and other constraining factors. But we certainly are thinking about it, and we recognize its importance. Yes.
Thanks. Very impressive span of activities and commitments. I guess my question is a lot. So I work in the Cancer Center, as you know, and as Associate Director for Education, and I've been a past director of a graduate program. And there's a lot of potential overlap with the missions, the educational mission of MICHR and of the ACGME fellowship programs and of the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies and of the Cancer Center and I'm sure the other centers. So how can we best leverage the expertise and work together with MICHR to make sure that as a community, as a whole medical school, we take advantage of the things that you're already excelling at and make sure that we work together and synergize instead of having competing silos?
So great question. I don't have a great answer for you, at least right now on the spot, but I think it is important for us to think about it. I mean, there are discussions that go on, but I think more formal connectivity is important. Now, we interact with the Cancer Center quite a bit, but I'll be very honest about my philosophy. I am not trying to have MICHR help everyone, because there are certain units and pockets, both at the lab level and the institute level, or the center level, that really have it together. So, the Cancer Center, if you think about regulatory support, the IND and IDE or clinicaltrials.gov reporting, for Cancer Center, it was, outstanding. For the non-oncology trials, it was really lagging. So that's where we recently stepped in to try to really help get things up to the standards of the Cancer Center. Biostatistics, recruitment. You have a lot of that in the Cancer Center already. So I did want to point out, I think there are certain domains where it's not that it's a silo, but we recognize these guys, they have a wonderful, and gals, have a wonderful infrastructure. So we're not going to try to compete, and we'll maybe direct our focus to the non-oncology investigator who needs a similar level of support, but who doesn't have that support across the campus. So with that being said, though, I think making sure that there is appropriate connectivity, at the higher level is important to make sure that there is no competition, that there can be synergy, that we help direct people to you if we see that maybe they're going to benefit from that engagement and vice versa. So I'd be happy to engage in discussions or have Vicki Ellingrod, who leads our education and training program, to engage in that discussion. So thank you for bringing that up. And again, I just want to point out, there are, thanks for bringing up the Cancer Center. There are a lot of great units across campus that have a lot of internal resources. I haven't discussed them because they're too numerous to discuss, and also because, again, I'm trying to describe services that really transcend a particular discipline or a disease focus. I think there's a question in the back. Sorry if I've been missing you.
So the Clinical Research Center has been a bottleneck for many of us in terms of availability of scheduling, the time it takes to schedule participants, and also the process of getting approval through the Clinical Research Unit. It seems to be that there can be a lot more done in terms of expanding that service or reorganizing the leadership or organization. What can you say about that?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. So first of all, I'm going to tell you what I tell a lot of people is that our clinical research unit is destined to fail, okay? And the reason why I say that is not because we're not trying hard, but because we have 1,500 active clinical trials going on around Michigan medicine, and that's just interventional trials. I'm not talking about observational studies. And we have a 10-bed unit down on the first floor. So the competition and just the volume that we're trying to, so why is there a bottleneck? You've got hundreds to 1,000 studies, usually hundreds, that are trying to use services that are very, very limited. So I acknowledge your point, and I'm sure it's true. The other problem is, and I'll just be open about it, like recently we've had a big study. I talked about the MICHR study. It's recruiting thousands of people, and that is consuming a lot of the bandwidth of the clinical research unit. So that's created further problems. So I don't have any easy solution. I think there does need to be a solution. I've talked to, and in fact, later on today, we'll be meeting with Anna Locke, who's the Assistant Dean for Clinical Research, and Cindy Bauer, who's the Managing Director of the Clinical Trial Support Office, to talk about what we can be doing, both in terms of increasing the efficiency of investigator or coordinator interactions with the CTSU and MCRU, but also what we can do more broadly. Again, one 10-bed unit or 10-room unit is just not going to cut it. And we have to be thinking about how we convert purely clinical space, either here on the main medical campus or at satellite centers, into flexible space that can be used for research. So I thank you for bringing it up again. Conversations are ongoing. I think the ultimate solution is really to not have the focus be on one place, one designated place, where all interventional trials or hundreds of interventional trials and observational trials are going to be conducted, to really thinking about how we can support people in situ, so to speak, in the clinical care setting. Did that sound reasonable or evasive? I was trying to strike the balance. But I'm acknowledging the problem, and I'm stating that it's not a trivial problem, especially given the limitations of space on the campus. Any other questions? Can someone throw me a softball so I can recover?
Hi, George. I direct the in vivo animal core, and I wanted to touch on that just very briefly because it kind of touches on mentorship. So we're talking preclinical here, but this can be a really early part of that process of trying to decide whether you've got something, no matter what that indication could be, the medical indication. Could be diabetes, could be cancer. We can help you look at the proper animal model, how to contain cost to look and see whether your mechanism of action is in play, to see whether there might be some safety concerns early. But this can be also part of the grantsmanship early on because you have this resource at the U. It can be part of that grant application that can say, let's do some early work and look and see whether we have like a new analog and what it can do in the preclinical setting.
Thank you so much. Thanks for identifying yourself and adding those comments. Any other comments or questions? Or do any other unit or core leaders have anything that they would like to point out?
I just have a comment. You know what happened at Duke, and I was just wondering, how do you prevent something like that from happening again? Or at least here.
So it's a great question. I don't have an answer. I mean, it's a difficult situation. A lot of investigators are placing trust in their teams. How do you screen for this? I mean, I think I can't give you any like official answer in my associate dean role. I'll tell you what I say just as an investigator is just a recurrent emphasis that aside from safety, nothing is more important than integrity in terms of our activities. So it's a complex problem. I don't have a solution, but it's definitely something that we need to think about.
I'm a certified clinical research coordinator, and I do think that that type of training where you're actually certified to do the work could be helpful because it's really embedded in you. Ethics are number one.
That's a great point. Any other comments? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to thank you all again for coming and for your engagement. And please feel free to contact us if you need to.